Welcome to the Partardez channel. Today, we explain Prophets Kings 2 chapter 4 in a clear and simple way, step by step. I am just so thrilled you're joining me for this explainer today because honestly, the stories we are about to unpack are incredibly vivid, they're deeply emotional, and they're full of these very literal physical actions that carry immense weight. We're going to look at distinct, continuous episodes in the life of the prophet Elisha, and we're strictly uncovering the straightforward meaning, the Peshat of this fascinating chapter. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this chapter by really unpacking verse 1 and the dire situation of this widow. The desperation here, you can just feel it. It's palpable. Speaking to Elisha, she establishes right off the bat that her late husband was from the company of the prophets, the Bnei Hanavim, a dedicated group of God's followers. She revered the Lord. But his piety, it didn't protect his family from financial ruin. In the ancient world, when a debt couldn't be paid, the literal legal consequence was that the creditor had the right to seize dependents. So now her two boys are literally about to be taken away as slaves. We are starting this chapter with an absolute terrifying crisis of survival. Now, to ensure we don't miss any of these details, we're going to follow this clear agenda. Number 1, the crisis of debt. Then 2, the Shunammite's hospitality. 3, the sudden tragedy. 4, the crisis of scarcity. Then we'll cover 5, practical life lessons, and finally 6, a chapter recap. All right, Act 1, the crisis of debt. This covers verses 1 through 7. Before we look at how Elisha actually responds, we really need to understand the stakes here. A creditor in this ancient context, known in Hebrew as a noshe, wasn't just someone who, ruined your financial standing or your credit score. No, this was someone who had the legal authority to physically take your children to work off a debt. So the widow, she isn't asking for a handout to buy dinner. She's begging for the freedom and the literal lives of her children. Elisha is standing face to face with a family that is right on the brink of total destruction. Now, notice Elisha's response in verse 2. He doesn't just hand her money. He asks, "How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" He totally redirects her focus from what she's lost to what she still possesses. And her answer is just heartbreakingly simple. She says, "Your servant has nothing there at all except a little oil." Now, in ancient Hebrew culture, olive oil, shemen, was a basic staple, right? Used for cooking, lighting lamps, anointing. It was the absolute bare minimum, literally the last thing left in a completely stripped-down home. And Elisha takes this literal bottom of the barrel and uses it as the foundation for her deliverance. Methodically, in verses 3 and 4, Elisha gives her a very specific, highly structured set of instructions. First, she has to go out and ask all her neighbors for empty jars, and he emphasizes, hey, don't just ask for a few, get a lot. Second, she is to go inside and shut the door behind herself and her sons. This part is absolutely crucial. The miracle requires privacy. It's this intimate moment of divine provision, not some big public spectacle. And third, pour the oil into all the jars, setting them aside as they get filled up. Elisha requires her to act in faith before she sees the result, trusting that the little she has will somehow be enough. So in verses 5 through 7, we see this incredible contrast between her initial desperation and the absolute abundance she ends up receiving. She follows the instructions literally. She shuts the door, her sons bring the jars, and she just keeps pouring. The flow of oil totally defies logic. It just keeps coming. It only stops when her son tells her there is not a jar left. The miracle was literally limited only by the capacity she had gathered. When she reports back to Elijah, he gives her the final, life-saving instruction. Go, sell the oil, and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left. Just like that, the debt is canceled and the boys are safe. Moving right along to Act 2, the Shunammite Woman. This covers verses 8 through 17. The text shifts gears here, going from a destitute widow to a very wealthy woman. So one day, Elisha goes to Shunem, a town in the Jezreel Valley, and a wealthy woman urges him to stay for a meal. And this actually becomes a regular occurrence. She realizes who he is and says to her husband, "I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God." And she really takes the time to offer deliberate, practical hospitality. She suggests they make a small room on the roof and furnish it. A bed, a table, a chair, a lamp. I mean, she isn't just throwing a blanket on the floor for him. She's permanently altering her home to accommodate the prophets. She's showing deep reverence through very tangible, practical means. In verses 11 through 14, Elisha is deeply touched by this and wants to reward her, so he asks, what can be done for her? He even offers to speak to the king or the commander of the army on her behalf, essentially offering her some major political favor. But she answers simply that she's perfectly secure among her own people. She doesn't need it. This prompts his servant, Gehazi, to point out the one thing wealth cannot buy. She has no son, and her husband is old. The text establishes this hidden unmet need that she hasn't even dared to ask for. Let's walk through verses 15 through 17. Elisha tells Gehazi to call her. She comes and stands in the doorway, keeping a respectful distance. And Elijah delivers this shocking prophecy. About this time next year, you will hold a son in your arms. She objects immediately. No, my lord, don't mislead your servant. You can tell she's just afraid to hope. Yet Elisha's prophetic word is fulfilled literally. The very next year, at that exact time, she gives birth to a son. Her practical hospitality resulted in a truly miraculous blessing. That brings us to Act 3, the sudden tragedy, verses 18 through 24. We see a sudden, drastic shift from joy to a terrifying crisis. Verses 18 through 20 describe the tragic details here. The child grows up, and one day he goes out to his father, who's working in the field during the harvest. Suddenly, the boy cries out, "My head, my head." It's a sudden, severe ailment. It was likely severe sunstroke, given the intense heat of a Middle Eastern harvest. The father has a servant carry him to his mother, and what follows is just one of the most heartbreakingly simple sentences in the text. The boy sits on her lap until noon, and then he dies. Just like that, in a matter of hours, the promised son is gone. Now, the crucial point in verses 21 and 22 is the mother's highly structured, deliberate reaction. She doesn't scream. She doesn't call for the mourners. First, she carries him up to the room on the roof and lays him right down on the prophet's bed. Second, she shuts the door behind her, securing the room. Third, she goes to her husband and asks for a servant and a donkey so she can go to the man of God quickly. Notice the parallel here to the widow with the oil. She shuts the door. She is containing the crisis and turning entirely to the prophet who originally brought the word of the Lord to her in the first place. In verse 23, her husband is understandably completely confused. He asks, why go to him today? It's not the new moon or the Sabbath. See, in ancient Israel, people typically only visited prophets on holy days like Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, or Shabbat, the Sabbath day. He literally has no idea the boy is dead. Her response is incredibly striking. In Hebrew, she simply says, Shalom, meaning it is all right, or all is well. She doesn't break down, she doesn't try to explain everything. She just keeps him calm with this one word, entirely locked onto her mission. She saddles the donkey and gives a strict command to her servant. Lead on, don't slow down for me unless I tell you. Her determination is absolute. She flat out refuses to accept this literal death as the final answer. Now, it's vital to know what happens next in the text, in verses 25 through 42. She reaches Elisha at Mount Carmel, and he returns with her. In a powerful, completely private miracle, behind closed doors, Elisha prays, stretches himself out over the boy, and the boy's flesh grows warm. The boy sneezes 7 times, opens his eyes, and is fully restored to his mother. It's incredible. And following this massive resurrection, Elisha travels to Gilgal during a severe famine. There, he performs another miracle, purifying a large pot of deadly, poisonous stew by adding a bit of flour, saving the company of the prophets from death. And that sets the stage perfectly for our final crisis. Act 4, the crisis of scarcity. This covers verses 43 and 44. In verse 43, a man arrives from Baal Shalisha, bringing Elisha food from the first fruits, the bikurim. This includes 20 loaves of barley bread and some fresh grain. Elisha tells his servant to give it to the people to eat. But the servant asks a very practical, logical question. How can I set this before 100 men? I mean, logic says it's impossible. It's a literal math problem. You cannot divide a few small loaves among 100 grown men in a famine and expect them to be satisfied, right? But in verse 44, Elisha just repeats the command, give it to the people to eat. And then he adds this prophetic promise. For this is what the Lord says, they will eat and have some left over. Prophetic instruction overrides human logic entirely. The result is instantaneous and literal. They ate and had some left over, according to the word of the Lord. The physical laws of scarcity are just completely overturned by divine command. Moving on to Section 5, Practical Life Lessons. How we can apply this straightforward text to our own lives. This brilliantly illustrates how the Peshat, the plain meaning of these stories, teaches us some truly profound truth. First, we learn the power of practical hospitality. The Shunammite didn't just offer kind words, she built a literal room. Second, we learn about acting with faith and urgency in a crisis, shutting the door to the outside world and moving deliberately. Third, we see the absolute importance of following instructions step by step, just like the widow who gathered the jars. And finally, trusting in miraculous provision when human math simply doesn't add up.
And Section 6, Chapter Recap. Bringing it all together.
To quickly recap what we've covered: 1. The crisis of debt. 2. The Shunammite's hospitality. 3. The sudden tragedy. 4. The crisis of scarcity. 5. Practical life lessons. And 6. Chapter recap. We saw Elisha relieve a widow's debt with oil, bless a hospitable woman with a child, witness a mother's fierce determination that led to her son's revival, and miraculously feed 100 men. These practical events show us a God who interacts intimately with the physical needs and griefs of his people.
Elisha's miracles remind us that God works with whatever we have, no matter how small it might seem to us. So, what empty jars in your own life are waiting to be filled through an act of faith? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.